a success. Even better.
Got it.
All right. Quick reminder, just really quickly, if you can, please put the name or the letters, the abbreviation of your community in your name, if that makes sense. And you know what? I need to model that really quickly because I'm logged in as just my old personal self. Feel free to raise your hand if you don't know how to do that. We can walk you through it. There we go. I'm from KOK. That's King of Kings Lutheran. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Awesome. Thanks, Paul. All the Pauls have their communities in their name. Thanks, Susan. Very great. Just in case you don't know how to do that, it is what can you do?
I'm stuck. I'm stuck. Anderson.
Okay, there we go. Hold your cursor over your own name.
Oh, okay.
Click on the ellipses in the upper right-hand corner, and all the way down at the bottom of that menu, it will say rename.
Wait, so I go from the name, and then what I do? I click what?
So hold your cursor over your own picture.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you'll see an ellipses, 3 little dots in the upper right-hand corner. Click on that. Go down to rename.
Okay. Oh, that's recording.
Oh, I see rename at the bottom there.
All the way at the bottom, yep.
Yeah. Click on that.
Click on that and you're off to the races.
But do I add the Prince of Life abbreviation before or after I click?
Click on that, your name, everything will come up, and then just put little POL after your name.
Okay.
Yeah. Good question. Well, there you go, folks. Yeah, really good to see everybody. I can see people from St. Paul's United Methodist Church. It's really good to see you all. Really nice to see the folks from Milwaukee Lutheran Church. Hello, Jesse and Susan and Jill. Folks from Oak Grove United Methodist Church. Hello, Paul. It's good to see you. Hi, Lois. It's good to see you too. Storyline, always a pleasure to get to share the screen with you. Prince of Life. Yeah, really awesome to be with you. And then of course, King of Kings. I mean, we see each other all the time. It's still wonderful. It's still wonderful even in this context. Now that we're all here and we've all showed up, I want to hand it off to Jesse to help us get grounded and started for our time. Thanks.
Thank you, Josh. And my name is Jesse. I am at MLC, Milwaukee Lutheran Church, not to be confused with McAllister Regional Airport in Oklahoma. And we are going to do our grounding in the land and our land acknowledgement. And this evening's topic of conversation is power and power analyses and what power means in the work that we're doing. So I wanted to have us reflect on what it means to explore the relationship between power and land. Historically, that has been a very contentious issue for human beings, and especially we who come from European descent have often seen land as a source of power, especially power over other people. In the United States, we have used land to create minorities. We have used land to create divides between peoples. We have used land to even divide communities. When we run a freeway through a neighborhood, that's using land as power. When we put people on reservations or internment camps, that's using land as power. We're taking away land. So I want to ask a reflection question and give you an opportunity to think about your relationship with land, maybe the land that you live on. I am a very, very, very recent homeowner. We just bought a house just before COVID hit. And so I spent the majority of my lifetime as a renter. And one of the things that I have reflected on is the difference in mindset in becoming a homeowner. When I was a renter, I didn't really care so much, so long as my the roof over my head was good and I had internet and utilities and it wasn't super expensive and nobody was super loud in neighboring apartments. I didn't get super invested in what was going on in the street out in front of our apartment. But now that I've got a house, I'm a landowner. That relationship has changed. I stand and stare out my front window and scrutinize every pedestrian that walks by for whether I recognize them or not. And I'm paying a lot of attention to who is walking on my land and who is letting their dog onto my land. And I find it a very conflicting set of experiences and emotions. So my reflection question is, for you that are homeowners, how has owning your own space changed or perhaps formed your perspective on the land that you live on? For you that aren't homeowners, perhaps renters, or perhaps you're in between places to live right now, what do you long for in terms of ownership, and how do you create ownership over the place that you, or the place or the space that you inhabit? And we'll just take 1 minute, not a super long reflection time, and I'll close this with a short prayer and the land acknowledgement. I'll keep track of time.
Do you really control when the city and county can tell you what you can do?
That is true. Feel free, if you've got ideas, to type them into the chat as well, if you would like.
Well, Harry and I have done both. And now we're renting. And I guess I do miss being able to paint a wall if I want to, or, you know, whatever, but we're very comfortable here. And we have somebody that comes and does all the yard work. We really like that.
Marshall writes, responsibility and stewardship for the future. Joshua writes, I remember as a renter wanting to care about where I live, but knowing that the investment wasn't worth it. Very conflicted. I'm right there with you, man. Whenever I punched a hole in a wall to hang a picture, I always felt like a rebel. Now I feel entitled. It's my wall. If I want to poke a hole in it, I can. Yeah. Any other reflections?
I think I was always, as a renter, there's an injustice around not being able to control your payment. As a landowner, I've owned a lot of houses, and with fixed mortgages, I knew how much that payment was.
Oh,
So there's just a huge inequity and injustice around rental increases.
you're bringing back PTSD for me there, Diane. The anxiety about rent increases is something I will never miss, or I won't. Anxiety around when our rent was, for sure, absolutely, and whether I'd be able to stay in my apartment. All right, I am one last one. I think about the advantage I have of being able to pass along inheritance. That is a huge one. And talk about transitioned power as well too, being able to pass land down to family members. That is a big part, especially of the source of racial inequality in the United States as well too. The trade-off is the anxiety about repair costs. There is that, Paul. All right, I just want to read a short reflection, then we'll read our land acknowledgement. And I just appreciate this is a prayer from one of my favorite people, Padraig O'Tuman, and this is a prayer upon power. Jesus of the way, when your friends argued about power and prestige, you stood someone unnoticed by them all among them and spoke of welcome. May we who are powerful look beyond our power. May we who are unnoticed be noticed. May we find the welcome that waits for us, and in doing so, welcome you who welcomes us. Amen. We are grounded in this land. We gather together on holy living land, earth, which supports and sustains us. We acknowledge that this region is the ancestral and unceded territory of the original people of the Multnomah, Wasco, Clackamas, Cathlamet, Cowlitz, Willamette, Tumwater, and Cascades bands of Chinookan peoples, the Tualatin band of the Kalapuya, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia and Willamette River. They lived and thrived in profound, complex, and interdependent relationship with the land and other beings long before white colonial settlement. We recognize we are here because of some systemic policies of genocide, relocation, and assimilation that was forced upon them. Today, we acknowledge the region's diverse, vibrant Native communities who are still connected to this land. Indigenous peoples, 70,000 strong, with more than 280 tribes, with at least 18 unique languages, both local and distant. We extend our deepest gratitude to you and your elders, past and present, who have stewarded this land and who carry on tribal traditions for present and future generations.
Thanks, Jesse. Hello, friends. I'm Pastor Sarah. I'm on the design team, and I am excited for digging into a topic that we'd all like to avoid, talking about power and the good, the bad, the ugly, the different ways that power manifests itself in our communities, and how to use it and leverage it. So we're going to dig into that this evening. One of the reasons that I do this work is as a pastor, I feel very strongly about leveraging power for the gospel and for the good news of the justice of Jesus. And I think that in community organizing, we get a way to actually practice that. So tonight we're gonna just get our bodies into that space of telling the story of power in our lives and in our communities. So for one-to-one tonight, Juliana is going to help me out tee up this topic. We need to talk about some things that maybe we would rather just pretend like they don't exist, or remember for ourselves what it feels like to be in a place where we felt powerful or we felt power. So that's one way to share in the one-to-one tonight. Another prompt, the opposite, is to tell and share with your partner a time where you felt like you didn't have power. So I'm curious, a time when you felt like you had power or a time when you felt like you didn't have power. Juliana, can you share just a little bit about how you might start to share a story in a one-to-one tonight?
Sure. So I'm sharing my experience or doing it in the one-to-one?
Yeah, just share like a little tidbit of how you might
sorry.
question in the one-to-one tonight.
Okay. So in 2019, I went to the Interfaith Movement for Immigrant and Refugee Justice to Salem to advocate for a bill that would allow all Oregonians to have access to driver's license regardless of their citizenship status. So the ability to drive legally is an everyday need for all families to get to school and work and take care of their family without fear. So at the time when I went, I was a teenager, and I went because I could tell it mattered to my mom. My mom is an immigrant, and she has seen how not having access to a driver's license interfered with so many of her friends' ability to meet their daily needs. When I got there, I saw a bunch of people marching for this need, and I thought they're here because one person might have brought a friend, or they already have like interest in this, or the power just like accumulated and together they had power. But when you're just one person, you just feel like you don't really make a difference until you realize you're not alone and you're not the only person who cares about, a certain thing. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Juliana. And I remember that was the day we first met.
Oh yeah.
So there's power in that story for me too, because I'm so glad to know you. So as you think about that question, just for yourself, recall a time, maybe a similar experience or an opposite experience of a time you felt like you could tap into power, or a time that you didn't have access to power. We're going to go into one-to-ones. Make sure to also, if it's a new person, like introduce yourself and your name and where you live and what core team you're a part of. And we'll be in that one-to-one for 15 minutes and then we'll come back.
Story.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good to see you. I hope that time in your breakout rooms was fruitful and illuminating to all the different ways power can show up in our lives. Like Josh said, my name is Story. I am on the design team. I am with Storyline and Oak Grove United Methodist Church. My why is that a few years ago, I went through the housing highway that Storyline collected. And that was my first time realizing that I was rent burdened. So that was a realization, but a realization that went with it was that I've never really been scared of losing where I live because I have such a good support system. I'm very privileged in that way. I've never felt like I wouldn't have somewhere to go or someone who would have my back. And I recognize that that's a privilege. And now I realize how big of a privilege that is, how not everyone knows that someone has their back. So getting to do work with people that want to be the ones who have each other's back, not just individually, but as a community, is important to me now that I realize not everyone has that. So that's my why for why I'm here. My little why for today is to talk to you about power, to give kind of an overview of some of the ways power shows up. For many of us, power is probably a little bit of a loaded word. It may have some connotations associated with it that we carry inside of us. Part of it I blame is because in the movies, the ones who are always obsessed with power are very clearly the villains. They always have like the black robes and they have lightning fingers and they cackle and they monologue about how they're pursuing power and how they're going to use their power to destroy the hero, but they always lose. But that contrasts a little bit with how we see power function in our lives, because the ones who amass power and wealth and strength, who have the loudest voice, who in a movie may be considered the villain, somehow, often those are the ones that feel like they're the most rewarded in our society in many ways. And so that creates a tension in us around this word power. What is it? Is it good? Is it bad? Do I hate it? Do I love it? Do I resent it? A lot of mixed feelings. So today we are just hoping to shift a little bit our understanding of power, specifically in relationship to the work we do in sacred organizing. So a few of the realities we need to face around power is first the one that it exists. It's real. That may seem like a pretty obvious one, but it's not always. And one of the best examples I can think of when it comes to when is it not obvious is the first time I realized that racism was not just individual acts, but that white supremacy was an institution. And that was one of my first realizations of, oh, this was influencing me and I had no idea. Because I wasn't being individually racist. I had no idea of the way this power, this white supremacy was influencing me. So it's not always as intuitive, the way power is shaping us. We have to sometimes intentionally look for it. So the first thing is, it's there. We live in a world with power. It exists. And we have to contend with that in our organizing. The second reality is that it's not inherently good or bad. even though we see it in all of those different mixed ways. Like I said, it's usually the cackling villain who's obsessed with power, but it's not an inherently good or bad thing. It changes, it's dynamic. Who has it and what it does and how it can shift. And that is a very important belief about organizing. If we didn't believe that power could shift, we'd kind of be wasting our time. But we believe it can be changed and it can be shifted and it can be used for good. That's a big part of why we do this work. And that means that it's important, an important part for us in this organizing is that process of unveiling, of pulling back, this sacred uncovering, so that we can really and truly see all the different ways power exists around us. Both the power that is used to harm and exploit and hurt people, and the power that is used for life and liberation, because both of those exist. To determine where the power lies, who has their hands on it, so we know where we can collectively direct our voices, our energy, our letters, our phone calls, our pressure, so that we can impact change. Now, because of our complicated relationship with power, because there might be some trauma involved in it, I wanted to look for a minute at a few ways we might react when we approach power. So I'm going to share my screen here. 1 second, present. All right. So one of the first ways that we might respond to power when we approach it, to ask questions and get curious about it, is to get overwhelmed. We retreat into the world as it is. This place of hanging our heads and saying, well, yes, power exists, no doubt, but those who have it, those who don't. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and that's just the reality that we live in. Or it's to look around and be like, this is the world as it is, and power is scarce. So I better hold on tight to what I have because it is not a lot. And if I lose it, I lose everything. So the world as it is impacts the way we react to our power. And we might want to retreat there and do any of those things. Hang our heads in despair or hold on tight and be really stingy about the power we have. Because we might not be at the top, but we might not be at the bottom. And we know we don't want to be at the bottom. So we're going to hold tight in the middle. Because power is complicated and our relationship with it is scary. The other way we might respond, which I am going to say, especially the people here might respond with equal fervor, is to go into the world as it should be. To lose yourself in this world that you've imagined, this world that is like, this is how it should be. This is how I want it. The world where power isn't disproportionately crowded at the top, but equally distributed, or the world where you're like, we don't even need power language anymore. I reject power. I reject its existence. I reject the institutions that are based on power. And, you know, that's not a bad idea. It's not a bad in concept, because when we say the world as it should be, that's notable. This is what we want, one where it is equally distributed, where no one institution holds the power. But when we go to the world as it should be, as long as the world as it is in existence, the only people who will benefit from us living here are the people who have power. They're the ones that are the only ones that will benefit from that. The people that are oppressed most under the power will not benefit from us living here as long as power exists. And as we said at the get-go, that's a very first important tenet. Power is real and it is all around us. And we won't be able to move the dial from the world as it is over to the world as it should be if we live here only. So, as sacred organizers, we are called to live here in this sacred middle, in this place of tension that recognizes that power exists, certain people have it, and ask the important questions about how do we respond collectively together to that power. We do not reject the existence of power by going into the world as it should be, but we don't live exclusively in the world as it is either. where we buy into the lie that power is scarce and to be hoarded and held onto. So we don't entirely buy in here either. We reject the lie here that says, I need to hold on to my power, or power is static and those who have it will always have it. Instead, we move here. We ask the question of how can we move power and leverage it for liberation and life. Existing in the world as it is and the world as it should be both rob you of your collective power. They rob us of our ability to make change. We make change here when we bridge this gap in the middle. So to begin reframing power, this idea of like, okay, what do I need to recognize about power as I live in this middle? If I don't want to get overwhelmed by how hard people use power, how violently people use it, if I don't want to get overwhelmed here, and if I don't want to live here, what do I do? So we're going to chat real quick about 3 different kinds of power, 3 different ways to reframe and understand power, to categorize it as it shows up in your life. And as I explain each one, I would love for you to think, where have I seen this? Where have I participated? Where have I felt it? Where have I been a part of it? Where have I been made to feel powerful or powerless by it? So that might have even come out in your one-to-ones. And drop those in the chat as I explain or after, and then we'll go through and do a quick harvesting of that information. So the first one is top-down power, power over. So this is a power that is authoritarian. It protects the status quo, consists of oppressive structures and institutions. This power seeks to exploit and control. So I'd love if you take like 20 seconds to drop any that just pop into your head. Where do you see this? Where have you experienced it? It can be personally or just in the world, because remember, we're just drawing our attention to power. Lawmakers, Kelly Lennox says. Paul Potter said most politics. Brandy Johnson says land use and planning, zoning, city, and county governances. Diane says, as a boss, I can have power over. Yeah, no, that's very important to always remember, like we can exist in many different spaces. Employers. I've experienced power over in government, Joshua Kingsley said. Sue Bosshard said bad bosses. Yeah, people that can control your finances, your health insurance, your livelihood. That's a lot of power over. Absolutely. David Smith, St. Paul says example, Trump. Joshua Kingsley says parents. Ellen Burns says the prison system. Yes, these oppressive structures that hold power over someone's life and their identity, their livelihood. Student loan systems. Amen. I feel that. So Sarah Samuelson. And Paul Potter says traditional organizations. Yes, all of these impact us, impact someone we know, sometimes in very obvious ways, sometimes in not so obvious ways. Again, this is what this process is unveiling that. But that's not the only kind of power, this power over. We also have power among. This is collective power, comes from organizing with and in our communities. Juliana shared a great example of this before our one-to-ones. So what comes to mind when you think of power among? So with and in our communities, this organizational power. Sarah says student walkouts. Yes. Paul Potter says unions. Kelly says cooperative schools. Yes. I've seen a lot of the student walkouts even this week. Just students saying we want to learn safely, so we're going to walk out. David Smith, are we organizing to gain power? I'm not sure. Sarah says neighborhood associations sometimes. Diane says as a nonprofit leader, we focus on trying to use practices that collaborate with those we serve. Yes, among. So it's not for even. Power for is a few levels away maybe from power over, but still has an element of power over, versus power among means with and mutuality. Anna says parents gathering together and asking for what they need and sometimes creating what they need in the school system. land and housing cohort. Exactly, Paul. That is exactly what we're doing. Power among. And Ellen Burns says legislative lobbying. Yes, all great examples. Our last one, Matt says equitable economic opportunity, and Paul says self-help groups. Yes, that idea of community and withness. There's a withness with power among. Then our last kind of power is power within. This refers to our internal capacity, the power that is inside of us as individuals that pours out into the community. It's the strength inside of us, what moves us, what makes us passionate, what motivates us and empowers us to do power among. So like faith, love is very broad because I don't want to give answers to you, or the things that like nourish your ability. What gives you power? What do you take in that gives you power? And then any examples of that you can drop in the chat as well. Knowledge, yes. Stories. Yep. Empathy, absolutely. Those are all great. You guys can keep thinking and dropping those in the chat to share with each other. But so we've talked a lot about power, and that was just a brief overview meant to be a big picture, but there's the how still. So we're going to give you a chance to kind of engage with a practice that allows you to say, how do I do this unveiling? How do I explore this power? And I'm going to hand it over to Anna for that.
Hey, Story.
Yes.
Can you put a spotlight on me and John for a moment? So we're going to explore the tool and the art really of power mapping. This is a part of the second part of the spiral. In the first part of the spiral, we do sacred encounter. And this is where we're doing a lot of listening to our neighbors, to our community members, and we're starting to hear where are the shared pressures, what's happening, what are people experiencing individually? And then we start to bring that together and say, what are people experiencing collectively? What are the patterns that we're starting to see in this system? And John is going to join us in just a second. That's why he's here. I'll give you your prompts, John. So this is where we start to say, okay, let's take all this information that as a group we're getting through all of these one-to-ones and start to see what patterns we see in the midst of it and kind of start to make sense of that. And that helps us see what otherwise, as Story was talking about, can kind of maybe be invisible to us otherwise. Last spring, we did our first power mapping with the Prince of Life team. And I thought it was just really fun. I enjoy doing that with you guys. John, the pastor of Prince of Life, agreed to join us and just tell us a little bit about that experience. Before we did the power mapping, to kind of tee that up, we talked about how decisions have been made kind of historically in the congregation. And I thought that provided a really interesting picture. John gave a story of 2 different decision points and how they felt differently. Can you tell us a little bit about that, John?
Sure. So Anna asked me to share the story of our becoming a reconciling in Christ congregation. And it started in 2014. I'd been at Prince of Life for about 14 years. We talked about becoming welcoming and affirming various times. And we thought it's time to do a process. And so we formed the team and we began to kind of have events. So we showed a documentary about queer folks and how they were accepted or rejected by their families. Very few people showed up. We had some Bible studies that did better. We invited the bishop. More people showed up. I began to hear some backlash. Like, if we vote on this welcoming statement, I'm going to withhold my pledge. I'll leave the congregation. I was feeling a lot of fear among folks, and they weren't coming to me because they knew I wanted this. So they went to other people. Conversations that were happening that were pretty fear-based. And by the way, I became too involved in this. So I learned later that I really should have taken a back seat and let the lay folks do it so that I could still be pastor to my people. We had a panel of folks who mostly were from outside the congregation. Our one openly lesbian couple said, we don't want to keep being, you know, like poster children for this. We're going to back away. And the panel was folks that we really didn't know very well. About a month later, I felt like we needed to have a straw poll and just decide where we were at or realize where we were at. And in the straw poll, we wanted 85% of folks to say, let's move forward. We got 74% saying, let's move forward, and 26% saying stop. So we ended the process. I was really almost went into grief about this. It felt like a failure to me. And so we put it aside. And about 6 months later, I had a woman call me and say, we're just wondering if you would do our wedding. This is two gay women who'd been in a relationship, two lesbians for 25 years. They were both grandmothers in their 70s. And Donald Trump had just been elected, and they were concerned that a new Supreme Court would take away gay marriage. So they said, we need to be married in about a month because our grandson is leaving for Vietnam. So I said, well, I'm your pastor. I said, but I'm not sure this is the right sanctuary because we just went through this process. We didn't pass it. So we ended up going to St. Stephen in Gladstone, which is an RIC church. We had a wonderful wedding ceremony on a very snowy night in January. And I came back to my council and I said, the next gay wedding that I asked to officiate at, I want to be at Prince of Life. How do we do that? We went through a process. We began to be intentional. There were more conversations. And in May of that year, so 6 months later, we voted that this pastor could officiate at the wedding of any couple he felt good about. A year later, we hired Des, who is our youth ministry coordinator. Des happens to be lesbian, was identifying as lesbian at that point, now identifies as non-binary. And I said to the council, we don't need congregational approval for this. The Constitution says that the council hires staff. They unanimously voted to hire Des as our youth ministry coordinator. Des began working with our kids, did a great job, still does. Relationships began to form. Positive conversations were happening around this new hire. The next thing that happened. Oh, and by the way, the couple that I married joined the church and people began to get to know them. So when we did the next panel, it was one of the wives, it was Des, it was one of our 3-generational moms in the church who had a 4-year-old son who was coming to church with a dress on. And she said, I want this church to be welcoming and affirming for my son, Chris, for whatever identity he has. And that panel had a whole different feel. And a month later, when we had the vote, I walked down the hallway and I could hear what sounded like a party in the fellowship hall. The mood was so different. The fear was gone. The conversations that had been happening were relationships with folks that we had come to know and love. And we passed it that day by a vote of 62 yes, 2 no, and 1 abstention. And I know who the 2 people are that voted no. I give their grandson guitar lessons, and their daughter does the maintenance at our church. They never left. So that's the story of kind of the change and the evolution that happened over, that was probably 4 years, 5 years.
What struck me about that story that I think really relates to what became the process of our power mapping there is that you had that feeling that you had entering the room the first time versus the second time. The first time you talked about being sort of anxious and you didn't feel great, and there were some more unknowns, right, with where people were. And that second time, I pictured you walking into that room, and the way you described this story is like you saw each person in that room and you knew where they were, and you knew where their hearts were, down to the 2 people, right? Like you knew exactly where they were because you had gone through this really relational process where you connected deeply to that. And it reminded me that when I first learned to power map in organizing, the person who trained me said, if you are ever surprised by a vote, like if you're ever walking into a room, like I have no idea how this is going to go, or if you walk into a room and you're like, I'm feeling awesome about this, and then it goes totally the other way. And I don't know if you all have ever experienced that. I think if you've ever been at a congregational meeting, you've probably experienced it at least once. And she said, if you ever get surprised like that, it means you have not mapped the power. You have not looked at the patterns of what has existed, and you haven't gotten close enough to those relationships to know what's happening. So I'm going to very briefly kind of give a picture of the process that we went through with Prince of Life, and that you guys are going to do just like a little teaser of in your next, in our breakout here. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Nope, just kidding. All right. So this is what our power, can you guys give me thumbs up if you can see that okay? Okay, great. So this is where we started with our power map. So we have this axis, right? And we were talking about the Prince of Life congregation. And we said, okay, we're going to look at folks who are on this y-axis from high influence to less influence. Like, where are we imagining people in our congregation? And influence, say in a congregation, it might be how people who are very connected to other people might have influence, people who are very involved, people who maybe have a positional power or trust with a lot of people, sometimes charisma, right? And people, when we did this with Prince of Life, had sort of an intuitive sense of that. And then we have on this X to Y axis, this strongly agree to strongly disagree. And we put a question on the table. We said, okay, where are people in terms of how we imagine they might react to this process of developing something missional on our land? Now, I think sometimes it can be hard to put someone's name up here. It feels like you're labeling them and deciding who they are. Just some encouragement there that this is just like a best guess process. And it's a starting point, right? It's also reflects something in just a moment of time that is actually very dynamic. We are not in this process assigning value to strongly agree or strongly disagree. We are just naming kind of maybe what is and recognizing it is moving and shifting all the time. So for Rose here, who is high influence and we think maybe might strongly disagree with that, we are not saying that's good or bad. In fact, we want to get curious about that. Like, oh, I wonder what Rose is feeling about this. I wonder what she knows or sees or wonders that we might want to know. And this is really important because even as we're looking at power mapping cities or communities, if we sort of villainize someone who strongly disagrees with what we're hoping to do, we actually lose our ability to influence them. We lose our ability to get curious and understand who they are because we've sort of decided, right? So we don't ask questions like, oh, what motivates them? What do they care about? What matters to them? And really then they have power over us because we've decided this isn't a dynamic system that can shift and change. So it's important to know this too. So if somebody has high influence, I said the wrong names, but you are following. If someone has high influence and strongly agrees, so that's Rose, that's important to know too, because it might be someone very influential in your congregation who would be totally on board, but actually isn't super connected to this process. So you're naming the fact that Rose has power, right? And might be interested in being invited into this process, for example. Whereas over here, Sally, who strongly disagrees, you're naming, she has a lot of influence in the congregation. We should note that. We should know how that might impact, and we need to do a one-to-one with Sally. So when Prince of Life did their process, what I noticed occurred as we did it, I'm going to borrow John's words here, is that it wasn't just about sort of mapping an outside entity power. It got us closer to the people. John used the word that it felt like an incarnational process. What I noticed is that after we mapped the power, Prince of Life started going like this on one-to-ones. There was a little bit of a kind of an aha moment of like, oh, I see how these people are connected, and I see why it matters to connect with them and how we might weave a picture together here. And that is the beauty of this, because it is incarnational. It's getting closer to the humans involved. And that also always gets us closer to the work that we want to do. So I am going to break us into our breakouts. Hold on.
I have it set up, Anna, if you.
Excellent. Okay. So we have 2 breakouts for you to choose from today. In breakout, I don't know which is 1 or 2, Story.
One is, oh, well, they're named Power Map OC, Power Map a Church is what they're named.
Okay.
Yeah.
In one of the breakout rooms, we're going to practice power mapping a congregation, and Josh Kingsley is going to lead in that. He's going to sort of choose a congregation, and whoever jumps into that can see, what does this process look like? And then in the other breakout room, we're going to practice power mapping Oregon City. So around that Prince of Life community, we're going to say, okay, what does the power map in this community look like? Who has decisional power over the things we want to do? Who can move the dial one way or the other? So you can choose. Prince of Life people might want to go to the Prince of Life one. King of Kings people might want to go to the other one, because you might be mapping your own congregation. Other than that, you can just choose what you're most curious about and what is most interesting to you. All right, Story, break us out.
I'm new with this. So it is the time in our agenda to offer a couple of celebrations for the communities that are here. When I mention your community, of course, we can all see your name, but feel free to also just kind of like raise your hands or do something so we can kind of see who you are, and we'll all be happy for you. I'll start with the King of Kings community. King of Kings recently won a grant to do an intercambio, a series of intercambios with our sister congregation, Canciendo la Verdad. So we're pretty happy about that. It's basically a grant to fund some house meetings that we would probably be doing anyways, but now we have some money to make them like really fun and really cool and hire childcare and like all that kind of stuff. So thanks to the Creative Ministries Granting Board, which is a Lutheran program, and that's our thing. I will switch over to Oak Grove United Methodist Church. Oak Grove has a really wonderful team of people coming together that include the Boss Hearts, who are on this call right now. Hi, Sue and Paul. Sue and Paul are these wonderful people that have moved into the area and are part of the Oak Grove community and are now are checking out this group as well. And they are joined by the McNamara's. And I don't think that the McNamara's are here. And then they're also joined by Rob, if I'm not mistaken. Story, am I correct on all that? So, and Kelly.
And Kelly.
And Kelly. That's 6. 6 people. They're rocking it hardcore. St. Paul's has started doing their one-to-ones. Hi, St. Paul's.
St. Paul.
St. Paul's has begun the journey of doing strategic one-to-ones, and Milwaukee Lutheran Church, I think, just recently did their not very first, but just recently did a research meeting. Yeah. And last, but certainly not least, I'm going to hand off the microphone to John really quick to tell us about Prince of Life's news.
Well, I was going to retire at the end of this month. And that's one reason I backed away from our core team, because we have a great core team and I wanted them to kind of do the handoff. And for a number of reasons, I've decided to extend my stay at Prince of Life until the end of May. So I'm really happy about it. My people are happy about it. And we're going to have a big old party in the parking lot or somewhere on Memorial Weekend. So sticking around a little longer.
All I heard is party, and I'm wondering, John, if you postponed just for the party, or if that was
pretty much, Sarah. Yeah. Pretty much.
I mean, I feel like that's a good enough reason.
Yeah, come on.
To postpone is for the party.
Well, part of it is we're going back online Sunday for at least 4 weeks, and I did not want to say goodbye on Zoom. That just wouldn't work. So yeah. There were a lot of reasons.
Nice.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thanks for sticking around. We'll take as much of you as we can get. Okay, I got 2 more things really quickly. We are almost out of here. The first is we are curious if it would be helpful to leave the ability for your core teams to meet, to like debrief after these calls for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it would take. So for instance, it would be like after this meeting that your core team would be able to go to a breakout room and just check in with each other, make sure you were all on the same page and leave that way. Can I get a thumbs up or thumbs down? Would that option be helpful to you? Thumbs up if it would be helpful, thumbs down if it wouldn't, just a brief. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay. All right, I see I see like a third of thumbs up and 2/3 of kind of like abstentions. I'm gonna go with that. That's totally fine. That's totally fine. It's a democracy, man. So we'll work on having that time available. The last thing is your homework. We're asking you the next time your core team gets together, can you practice power mapping something?
Well.
Yeah. And it could be anything. You could power map your congregation. You could power map, core team. You could power map whatever is helpful. Power map the church board.
All right.
There you go, Anna.
Well, thank you, Josh. We are about out of time. I am going to ask for 3 more minutes of your time. But if you need to jump off and get to whatever you need to be at, feel free. I'm going to give you one note that we didn't talk about in power mapping, but is really important and to think about as you practice it. I didn't get to talking about the less influential part of the power map. Something I want you to really tune into there is notice who has less influence in your system that should have influence in your mission. So let's say you see someone in that lower quadrants who maybe is close to your mission, right? Who maybe would live in the kind of housing that you have, or cares deeply about that, or it affects them personally. Those are people you should do a one-to-one with, and will need to work to elevate their voice so that they do have more power in your system. Okay, last but not least, in our last 3 minutes, well, now it's 4 because I said that, 4 minutes. Okay, in our last 4 minutes, I would love if you could just let me know a thing that really grabbed you today. And just go ahead and drop it in the chat, or have fun, Matt, or you can unmic and speak out loud briefly. Go ahead.
I appreciate the
hearing from Brandy and how she has experienced her executive director position within the communities was very enlightening and great.
Thanks, Jill. Story agrees with you. She said Brandy's process of power mapping and seeing how she like firsthand did it was super helpful. Kelly says, pay attention to power people who are close to the agree-disagree line. Paul says how power dynamics have changed over the last couple of years. Sarah had a great one-to-one about how avoiding talking about power doesn't actually get us away from power. Ooh, that's a good one. Ellen says that stories, teaching on power is really great. Josh says that listening to people on the left of the power map. John says getting close to humans gets us closer to the work. I think so. I heard someone unmute for just a second. Was there one more auditory that you want to share?
Might have been mine, John.
Yes.
Actually seeing you move the note cards on the matrix as we discussed it, that did a much better job of implanting what's going to be going on in my mind because it's flexible.
Yeah, it kind of brings it to life a little bit, doesn't it? Sue says the importance of one-to-ones, and Kelly was reminded that one-to-ones, that when we are in the one-to-one, that when we are powerless, to look for the places we do have power. Oh, I like that too. This is some really good stuff. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We will see you next month in February, on February 10th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. And we will leave time at the end for your core teams to debrief if you would like it. So go ahead and prepare for that. All right. And that is all we have. See you all later.